this is Jessie Covington,
Jen Yam, and Katie Crew.
Today we are going to talk about our grading policy. Our grading policy reflects our philosophy of education because we want our students to focus on mastering the material rather than working the system to gain points. We want to create lifelong learners who will strive for excellence, not lifelong memorizers who are only focused on a number. Each day, we expect our students to be prepared for class. They should complete their homework to the best of their ability. Since it is unreasonable to have students complete a homework assignment that they do not understand, they will not be penalized, as long as they have attempted the homework and come to class with questions. However, if it is evident that the homework was not attempted, this could be any situation, such as the student forgot to do the homework or completely ignored it, then they will have to finish it in class while the others are completing group work. Students will also be expected to come to class with their materials and be on time. This means that whatever books or lab equipment is required for that day, students should have these items with them and be sitting in their seats and ready to learn by the bell ring. Students who fail to follow these instructions will receive individual reminders that they need to come to class on time and be prepared. Students who make a habit out of failing to follow these instructions will need to conference with the teacher privately. In these conferences, teachers will go over the classroom expectations and may even invite the student's parent if necessary. As a teacher, it is important to consider how the final grade will be calculated. Grades should reflect mastery of content rather than the ability to turn in something on time. Many teachers take off points if something is late, resulting in a lower score. But what if they understood and met all the learning objectives? A 75% should reflect the fact that the student understood 75% of the material rather than turned in 75% of the assignments. The final grade will be broken down into 3 categories. The summative assessments are worth 70%, and these include tests, performance assessments, and quizzes, which are included in this category. Tests are worth 25% and given at the end of a unit with the purpose of measuring standards for the whole unit. Performance assessments are worth 25% and also given at the end of the unit with the purpose of measuring standards found throughout the whole unit. The quizzes are worth 20%. These are given throughout the unit as mini tests to measure students' understanding of specific standards. This category is weighted the most because it is supposed to reflect the student's mastery of foundational knowledge and skills. Formative assessments include graded classwork, and this is worth 20%. This category is only worth 20% because formative assessments measure growth, which cannot be graded heavily because we want students to improve and not be defined by a number. Classroom practice is an all-encompassing category which includes homework and participation, and this is worth 10%. Classwork will be collected at the end of each class period and will be used for evaluating student understanding. Because students are continuously learning and building on their understanding, the grades given for the classwork can be changed if students want to redo the assignment. The policy on redos will be discussed later. Another way to evaluate student progress is through quizzes. Quizzes will serve as checkpoints throughout the unit and assess learning before they take the final assessment.
Late work is defined as the assignments that are not turned in within a 2-week limit or an assignment that is not turned in before the unit has passed. Late work becomes missing work after 2 weeks or the unit has passed. The policy on missing work will be discussed at a later portion of this video. In terms of late work, we will require students to make up tests and projects, but will not be accepting homework late because it is an insignificant factor that does not drastically affect the student's grade. Frequency also determines the acceptance of late work. If a student has late work occasionally, then the work will be accepted. If the student has a habit of turning in assignments excessively late, then the student will be required to have a meeting with the teacher to discuss why they are struggling with turning in work on time. For assignments worth a greater amount of points, such as projects and papers, there will be a deduction of points, but from the format and participation section of the rubric. All late work should be accompanied by an incomplete form. This shows the teacher why the assignment was late and their action plan on what they will do to complete it and turn it in. This type of form teaches student responsibility as it requires them to acknowledge their actions and also helps them implement an action plan so that they can get their work done. If students still fail to turn in late work by the time that their form says they will, Students must conference with the teacher so that the student and teacher can get together to figure out why the student is struggling. Together, the student and teacher will create an action plan so that the student can begin turning work in on time. We've defined missing work as work not turned in by the end of the unit or work more than 2 weeks late. The reason that we gave students these two definitions is because we did not want the summative assessment of a unit to be considered missing just because it is the last item to be graded at the end of a unit. But we also did not want students to think that work that had not been done previous units ago was just considered late. Our main missing work policy is that a student will not receive a 0 for missing work. On most grading scales, a failing grade starts at 60, so we will give students a 60 instead of a 0 because this sends them the same message that they received a failing grade. However, the difference is that students can recover from a 60 compared to a 0. In other words, students who are checked out for the first half of a grading unit can still receive a passing grade if they decide to check in for the last half of the grading period, as long as they display an understanding of the learning. The only exception to this rule is homework grades. Homework along with participation is only 10% of a student's grade, so giving a student a 0 if they are missing some homework will not significantly affect their grade. Lastly, missing work will not be accepted during the last week of the grading period because there is not enough time to grade this missing work.
Students are given the opportunity to redo assignments with the exception of homework. This is because homework is an insignificant part of a student's grade, less than 10% along with participation. So allowing students to redo these would not have a significant impact on their grade. If a student receives a 70% or lower on a summative assessment, such as a test, quiz, or performance assessment, they will not be required to retake that assessment. But before these students complete their required redo, they must first meet with us, the teachers, to discuss ways in which they can improve their grade, how they plan on preparing, and when they would prefer to complete the redo. This conference should help students understand ways to improve, allow them to ask us questions about feedback, and help put in place an action plan that will allow them to succeed and demonstrate their true understanding of learning. Students who receive a 70% or higher on summative assessments are not required to complete a redo, but they can ask the teacher to do a redo if they would like to improve their grade. It is their responsibility, the student's responsibility, who receive a 70% or higher to ask for a redo. It's not the teacher's responsibility to determine what grades students find acceptable. If the student who received above the 70% does want to do a redo, when the student talks to the teacher, they must have a plan of how they plan to improve the grade. Their plan should consist of some form of study materials and how they plan to use them to improve their grade. The student should prepare outside of class and inform us, the teachers, of the day they would like to redo their assignment. The redo assessment will also not be the same as the original assessment. Instead of giving students identical tests or other assessments, we will modify the questions to prevent students from memorizing the questions on the original assessment. The redo assessment will cover the same information as the original, but it is up to our discretion on how we want to present these questions to the students. For summative tests, students will have the opportunity to just take the part of the assessment they struggled with the most, rather than have the student retake the entire assessment. We will pull the sections they had the most trouble with and test them on those sections. The exception to these rules are writing assessments. When we're doing a writing assessment, students will be expected to edit their assessment as the real-world writing process allows for editing. Since extra credit usually does not align with standards, students will not be given extra credit opportunities. Instead, students can complete a redo, turn in missing assignments, late assignments, or incomplete assignments to gain back points. If a student is worried about his or her grade, they can set up a time to talk with the teacher to prepare for a redo to gain back points. Finally, it's important to remember this quote by Rick Wormelli. Grades are communication, not compensation. The emphasis should be on student mastery of the material, not the percentage they receive. Grades show student progress, areas they excel, and areas where they need more practice.